Hi there, so welcome to this third video in this series of tutorials that are getting you to start to bounce a ball and start to be introduced to some of the key tools within Maya that animators use, and also some of the key principles of animation. So in today's lesson we are going to look at creating editable motion trails, and we're also going to look at adding squash and stretch to our animations. Okay, so basically we should have our ball. As in the last two lessons, we've created keyframes, we've set our time and space in, and we've added played around the timeline, and we've got some bounces happening, and we're ending around where we want. So again, just to recap on some of the key controls, our Q hotkey, by pushing Q on the keyboard, brings our select tool. W brings up our translate tool. E brings our rotate tool up, and R brings our scale tool. Okay. In addition to that, Control Z is undo. And on our mouse, if we just quickly go to the perspective view, Alt or Command if you are using a Mac, and left mouse button pushing and dragging will allow us to rotate around the selected object that we have. If we push F, it will refocus that. If we scroll in with the mouse, we'll zoom in and zoom out. And if we hold Alt or Command and push the middle mouse button, we can drag left to right. We can pan left to right. So if we just go back to orthographic and go to front view, where we can see our bounce moving along quite nicely now, we're going to start to think about how we can manipulate this. So we may want to speed this up, we may want to slow it down, we may want to tweak the whole object, and we may not want to use the graph editor. We may actually want to manipulate these movements within the actual viewport itself. So one way of doing that, as you may have seen in the previous lesson when I was demonstrating some of the curves, is by creating an editable motion trail. So if your drop down menus on modeling by default, or rigging, or some other form that you don't need, change that to animation and go across to visualize, and if we go down to create editable motion trail, okay, so if we select that, we can see our bounce in physical space, and all the key points are at the center of the object. Okay, and as we go through, we can watch that play and we can see that happening. Okay, which is pretty cool. I like it. And what may happen though is you may want to speed that up or slow that down, which can be a bit of a pain. Now we're going to have to do a couple of things here. So because of if we're moving in the X channel, when we move this, it's going to move it in relation between the two keyframes. Okay, so at the moment I'm clicking and dragging and selecting RX. As well, I see people doing this all the time, just to go quickly off subject. What I remember, just going right close to it, just doing this little selection thing. It just looks so awkward, and I don't get why people do it. You know, get a big open space, just click and drag, make it really clear and obvious what part of the object you are trying to select. So as I was saying, so on Translate X, I'm putting this in, and what's happening is it's actually just changing the relationship between these two curves. And I actually want to click and drag and change the relationship between this point and this point. So I'm going to take this frame, I'm going to delete, oh yep, I want to delete that, that's right. And I'm actually going to take this point now, and I'm gonna move. Sorry, I want to select this keyframe here. I'm going to actually move this across, and you can see our bounce is now physically changing over time. So before, what's happening, if I just bring that keyframe back up, just pop Control Z to undo, is it actually going to come back? There we go. So if I move this across now, oh, wrong one, which we can select the actual point. So if I just move that back, it will make this a bit more obvious. You can see it's just moving the relationship between this and this. If I was to move this point as well, and start to manipulate that. Okay, but we don't want to do that, so this is why we're deleting this keyframe. We want it to change the whole relationship. Okay, so again, if I move that now, we can see that change in the viewport. So if I have a much faster ball, again, it's not actually happening faster, it's just happening over the shortest amount of space. And this is really important because we aren't manipulating space with our timings, we're manipulating our physical space. Okay, and I think this is where the principle of time and spacing really becomes clear, because we're not making the bounces happen faster, we're just making them happen over a shorter amount of space. So if we wanted to speed them up, we would have to manipulate the relationship of these timings, okay, the actual overall length of time that this is happening. Okay, so one way of doing that is to actually go back into the curve editor, well, graph editor, sorry, as I said before, I do call it the curve editor just because I work with curves, but its actual technical name is the graph editor. If we go to the scale tool by pushing R, okay, and hold shift, and in the graph editor push shift and the middle mouse button and drag left and right, you can see we're actually now manipulating the timings. Okay, so I've really shortened this up. If I push W and I push shift and middle mouse button, click again, I can actually drag that down to the start again, and what you will see now is it happens much quicker. Okay, there's a much quicker bounce happening. So let's watch that again. Okay, and so we've actually playing about between the graph editor and the editable motion trail. We're changing spacing in one, and we can change time in the other. Okay, which is those two key principles. So this time I'm going to change the actual spacing. So it's going to happen really quick, and it's going to happen over a much shorter space as well. So the whole thing is actually being speeded up and decreased in its movement. So we end up with this really sort of quick, quirky bounce, which at the end I don't like. It feels like there's almost a magnet sucking it to the floor, stopping it and stopping that energy. We have this really sharp energy and it dies out very quick, which is a little bizarre. So I'm going to undo that. I quite like the speed, which is our timings, and I'm really happy with the space, and it's now actually moving across. And as you can see, you know, our bounces, all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fourth bounces, yeah, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bounces are happening in just over a second. Okay, they're happening really fast, and that's fine. That's fine. I think Richard Williams in his book The Animator Survival Kit talks about animators when they're young, they tend to create really fast animations, and as they get older, they tend to create really slow animations, and what we look for is something in between. So the editable motion trail is really useful in looking at where things are happening in space, where things are moving, and are really good for that movement in space. The graph editor is really good at manipulating your timings, okay, and changing the timings of that whole scene happening. So that's how I like to think of it, as a good relationship. Editable motion trail is for space, and the graph editor is for timing. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that, and actually I think now is the time for us to start thinking about adding our next principle, which is squash and stretch. Okay, so I'm going to leave the editable motion trail here for now, and we're going to just quickly go in. We're going to take this in because obviously our animation stops at frame 63, and I'm going to take that to frame 75 as the endpoint, just to give a bit of pause at the end once it's stopped, a bit of breathing space for your audience. And we're going to go into this object, and we're going to actually work with our scale tool. Okay, so by pushing R, you will see as well, if you push minus, very quickly, and plus, you'll see that you can change the size of this. So that's on the hotkeys, the minus and the plus. So if you're struggling to see a part of your tool, you can push plus or minus. And as you see with the scale, we can change that thickness, okay, those thicknesses. So in our viewport, what we're going to do is we're going to set these high points, okay, where the bounce is up. Now we want the bounce at this point, our ball, to be solid. Okay, at this point it's going back to its natural shape. There are no pressures, it's not hitting the surface, so it's not crushing, it's going to go back to its natural form. So in our rotate X and rotate Y, at these points we want both of them to be 0. So by left mouse button clicking and dragging on the word scale X and down to Y, or select both. By right clicking and going key selected, it will keep both of those frames at 1. And we're just going to go through to all the bits where it's in the air, so all of these points across here, and we're just going to key them ready at 1. Okay, and we're just going to quickly go through, so every other keyframe should be set that way. And once it's set, we've got key selected, and you can see along here, scale Y, they're all set. And right, so now we're going to focus on these bottom points, and we're going to actually scale this. Okay, we're going to scale that down. And if it's a tennis ball, I think we should probably do that to about 0.8, I think. So what I'm doing here is I've selected Y, and I'm actually middle mouse button pushing, okay, holding the middle mouse button and going up and down, and it will do it for me. I'm going to take that to 0.8, I think. I don't want it to be overly exaggerated. It's a soft ball, but it's not the hardest, and it's not the hardest of balls, but it's not completely soft. It's not going to completely collapse. And I'm going to keep that frame in. Now, what we need to do here is also consider the fact that if it compresses, that mass will be pushing outwards, okay? So it hasn't just gone down, it's actually pushing out at the same time. And so because I've taken 0.2 off Y, I'm going to add that to scale X, okay? So it's going to be 1.2. So actually it's increased on the scale X, it's increased its width as it's decreased its height, okay? And as we go down, you'll see that the ball now, okay, starts to decrease its shape, which is exactly what we want. We want it to be squashing at that end point, okay? So I'm going to go through and set squashes at all of these points. So our X is going to be 1.2 and our Y is going to be 0.8 as we swap over a value of 0.2 between them. And I'm just going to go along to each point and add those in. I'm going to type them in, and we're going to just select them and drag, right click and go to key selected, okay? So once we know those values, we can type them in. Remember, it won't automatically save, you have to key that selection. And as we go through, yep, and we've got one there as well, 1.2, 0.8, and we might find it's probably a little bit too much over here, which we'll come back to in a bit, okay? And again, here it goes down, we're going to change it to 1.2, 0.8 as it hits, and it will go back to its natural form after. So again, now we have it going down, and we have all of our squash set in, so let's watch that back. And this is fine, we can start to feel that squash now, we can start to feel that power, but obviously at the end there it's not going back to its normal form, so we'll take it back to here, type in 1 and key those frames. But again, yeah, so we've got the roll, we've got the squash, and we can feel it happening, but it still looks a little weird for me. It's still not quite it still feels a little weird that it's compressing, because as it falls down it's compressing as though it's hitting against something, and it's not hitting against anything, so it shouldn't decrease. Actually what happens is gravity is pulling it, so if anything what should happen is as it goes into this movement, it should be the opposite way around. It should be stretching towards that gravity, it should be being pulled into it. So we actually need to add stretch to our scene now, okay, which we don't want it to happen here. We want it to happen just before and just after that squash, okay, because obviously the forces are pulling it in, and here it's pushing it out, okay. So at either side of that frame we're actually going to swap these around. So I'm going to have my X at now 0.8, okay, and I'm going to have my Y at 1.2. We're going to swap them over, and we have now I stretch and I squash, I stretch and I squash. As we fall in, that's happening. Okay, it's falling, and we'll feel that. So I'm just going to go through to 6, and I'm going to do the same this side. As that force comes out, and so 0.8 on X, 1.2 on Y, and as that force comes out, we now have that jump. We have that coming in and back out. Okay, and we're just going to do that every point where this bounce happens. So 0.8, 1.2. Again, as I said at the beginning, you know, when we do these things, it can seem quite monotonous, but we have to think about that end result. So it goes down, it squashes, so we stretch, squash, and we want to stretch back out. So we go 0.8, 1.2. So again, don't be put off by the repetitive nature of this. Think about how awesome it's going to look at the end, because that is why we do it. That is why we do animation, because we want to make movements and gestures look amazing and pretty and awesome. So 0.8, 1.2, and we can key select that. So again, as we come back down here, we need the same thing again. 1.2, select both of those, right click, key selected, and I'm hoping by now that you're really used to doing this. Okay, so at this point there's a bit of space in between here. We can probably go 0.9 at this point and 1.1 and add a little bit, but nothing too much. And okay, obviously one frame in between there, we don't have the space to do it. So if we play that back now, you can see we can feel that bounce and that jump, which is pretty cool. We have our ball sort of doing that like a little rubbery type bounce. Okay, it's happening fast and it's easing out. That momentum's dying off, and I'm quite happy with that. Yeah, I think I am. So there's one more thing though that we need to think about, and that's the fact of the direction of the movement. Okay, the fact that it's actually just dropping straight down here. Its direction is just straight down, which isn't how it's moving. It's actually moving diagonally across space. And so our next and final stage is to actually add that trajectory on the angle that it's moving out at. Now the bonus that we have here is that we have our curves, so we can line the center line of the ball, okay, which is here with the curve. Now what we don't want to do is to continuously rotate the ball forward, because it's going to look pretty odd with our squash and stretch. It's going to feel like it's going to change those angles. It's going to change the angle of these. So if we keep rotating, this is actually going to change this to look like a squash again as it goes in. Okay, so what we need to do is think about these movements as moving it anti-clockwise and then moving it clockwise. So where we set our frames for our twist, so I'm just going to click my rotate tool, so we want rotate Z at the start. I'm going to keyframe that on 0. What we want to do is follow this line, so I'm going to push plus, make this a little bit bigger so you can see, and I'm going to rotate that back round till that is lined up with that there, and that's going to be at where I keyframe that stretch before. So I'm going to right click and key select. I'm not bothered about being perfected at this point on these, because it's much more about following that trajectory than having a clean number. Okay, now as you can see there, it's wonky, but what will happen is as I change this side, that will average out to 0, roughly to 0. So once we go back to our stretch on the out, we can go back, we can line that up, and we can key that selection, and as you can see, it's now roughly lined that back up. But if you really want to fix it, you can go in and type 0 and just key that selection, and as we go through, we can see now we have that bounce in and bounce out on that trajectory, which is exactly what we want. We want it to go back to 0 at the top here, because we're going to, so basically it's this rotation between anti-clockwise and clockwise. At this moment in time, we're turning clockwise, and then once we get up here, we want to turn back to anti-clockwise as we go back down. So I'm going to twist this round. I'm going to go back to my translate Z, which is still selected, key select, and we can see now that we have that change. Okay, So again, I'm going to go back to 0 at the top up here. You don't really have to key those in, but it's just nice to sort of do that for best practice. And as we go back down to our stretch, we're going to rotate it again, and we're going to right click and key select that rotation. So we didn't do the out, out here. So just going to rotate that there, key select, check our center line. You can take that to 0 if you wish. You don't have to. And we're going to end up with some really nice looking bounces. And take that back to 0, right click and key selected. So, and then obviously we just need to do our out, which we can rotate that around and key select. Again, as we go through, it can be time consuming, but again, it's going to look awesome at the end, and that's what we want. So as we go in here, we can take that to 0, and we can key select. Then again, there's not much point adding angle in there. We can probably get away with one in here, but it's probably too dramatic actually. I'm going to leave that one back at 0. Probably not actually. Yep, we're going to change it. And we'll put 0 here. Zero at the bottom there, and by that point we run out of keyframes anyway, so we're just going back up. So let's just have a quick watch of that, take it back to 1, push play on the time range, and that's looking pretty awesome. Well, when it isn't lagging. There we go. So just to really get a good view on that, we're just going to get the outliner up. I'm just going to delete the editable motion trail. So if you select this here, and we just push delete on the keyboard, it will get rid of it, and we can just check out our ball, and we can see that bounce really soft. And obviously we can change the values of our squash and stretch to make it more subtle, to make it more of a harder ball. Okay, so don't feel that we have to have it as exaggerated as what we have here. It could be a small solid object. And so that's really the last sort of lesson in these initial stages. Over the coming weeks, we're going to look at adding lights, adding cameras, adding textures to the ball to make it feel a little bit more real, give it a little bit more personality, a bit more drama, and potentially adding a little bit of anticipation. So yeah, I think we've made good progress. Excuse me, burping there. We've made good progress. We've made quick progress, and I hope to see some really good results as a result of playing around with this. Remember, you can download Maya at home at the student. If you type Maya student, it will give you a link, and if you've got a student account, you can sign up and download it free and get a 3-year license to practice in. So please make use of these tools that are available to you. When I was certainly training in Maya, they weren't free. We had to go into the education institute and use the software there. We couldn't get them at home for free. So please take advantage of it and get yourselves ahead. But I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. Take care.